Welcome to Today in EVE Online. It's September 16th. Well, right off the bat, we have to look at what happened over the weekend at G Fleet. That is the meetup that happened in Berlin. But before we get to that, we'll talk about the immediate stuff, which is that local appears to be broken again, even though today was the day, or was that downtime, that the blackout would be lifted. That was one of the major announcements coming out of G Fleet. Blackout is going to be lifted, and local will come back to outlaw space in 0-0. But they are having some problems with that transition, it looks like. There's an extended downtime. There's been some downtime and reports of DDoS attacks, probably from people who are upset, we assume, but who knows. Good morning, everyone. I have with me Lux. How's it going, Lux?
Yeah, hey.
It's going. Let's actually
Oh,
review the video. We're going to go back to reactions from this weekend. Let's see if we can play this video. So, okay, I'll describe for people who can't hear this. All right, we'll stop there. So I want to note they put up an image that has it's a little meme dog with super saucery eyes, and he's drinking a cup of coffee, and he's got a little hat on. It's a cartoon, but in the background there's flames and smoke, and the caption is "This is fine." So at first I saw that and I thought, "Oh, CCP's making fun of themselves. Like, oh my God, all the players are leaving. This is fine." And I thought, well, they wouldn't do that. And so what this was, and I think how people read it, was that you were seeing null sex reaction to everything going dark around them, and how they're they're super caffeinated, and because the dog has super saucery eyes, and basically terrifying, ignoring the danger all around them. And so what you hear in there is the crowd laughing and clapping and hooting and hollering, and a pretty good amount of that. So we'll continue to where the announcement actually happens.
We live in Iceland, we often laugh at tourists walking around with umbrellas because the weather there really doesn't allow for umbrellas. You have it for 1 minute and it's gone the next, and the rain might change direction altogether and start going upside down on you. So an umbrella is kind of a useless tool for us Icelanders.
Okay, so that's CCP Cognac, and he kind of stumbles around giving an analogy that Icelanders don't use umbrellas because, hold on, volume changing. Voice check. That must be louder. Sorry about that. So he's making a joke about Icelanders laughing at tourists who use umbrellas because umbrellas are useless in Iceland. The wind blows all around, blows under you, blows to the side of you, so an umbrella doesn't really work. But he's trying to make a comparison that you will see what he means in just a second.
In Eve, though, it's been way too safe for a long time. There's no wind there. You're under your umbrella, you'll never get wet. Null has been, like I said, far too safe for a long time and far been way too easy. And it had become so harmful for the economy. We had way too much ISK flowing into the game and way too little ISK going out of the game, and it was just all too easy.
We'll stop there again. Lux, I'll bring you into this part if you don't mind. That's an important point that he's making. He's essentially saying, but umbrellas in the game are making the game way too easy, and there's way too much money in the economy because of it.
I mean, you're best off asking Caleb that. He'll give you a more detailed answer if there can be too much ISK. But I mean, the point about safety, I think, is very relevant. You don't want nullsec to be a place of safety, regardless of how much super umbrella that you have. And we have to sort of wait and see whether or not the Sino changes will fix that.
Right.
I get the feeling that CCP is going to want to produce some more wind to get under that umbrella.
So we'll go along with the analogy. Again, he starts out by setting up the joke saying the umbrellas in Iceland are useless because the place is terrible. There's wind going every which direction, and umbrellas won't save you. But in the game, they will, and that's caused a problem. And the problem is too much money and too many big ships. I don't know if he says it here, but Hilmar said it. In Finland, there's just too many Titans. Titans are the actual problem. So are super capitals and that sort of thing. So, okay, we'll continue with this video.
The blackout has already had a major economic impact to the better. And actually, for the first time now, in many years, we actually have wiggle room to start thinking about increasing rewards for more dangerous activities. This is something we couldn't dream about back in the day.
Okay, so we'll pause there for a second. So the next thing is he says, it worked. We created wind with blackout. We created chaos. We made the umbrella useless, just like Iceland. And it worked. They got the desired result, and they actually flattened NPC bounty collecting in nullsec. And you can see this across the board, especially in the north, where they went from, I don't know the numbers, but they reduced it essentially to 1/20th the size that it was before. They essentially flattened it. And that ripples throughout the entire nullsec region, the oppression of not knowing what's out there and basically really risking your ship to destruction was too much for most players, and they stopped going out there and ratting to their heart's content. And also bots got wiped out, like 4,300 of them in 1 month. What do you think, Lux?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely effective on the bots in nullsec. People might note that, they just moved somewhere else, but they weren't spinning around as much in anomalies in nullsec as they were, which is good.
Mm-hmm. Even if they move to highsec, which I think there's only anecdotal evidence of that. You might have heard that Boat said that Imperium knows groups that bought, and they followed them to highsec where they set up shop there. And which I thought was very funny, because I thought, if you know bots, why aren't you dealing with them yourself or reporting them? And CCP said, they said, well, they reported them, but there's a long lag before they get going. Whatever. I just think, like, there was a few months ago, there was a huge scandal where bots were deleted from the game, and the security team from CCP actually came out and said, here's where they came from. They came from Fraternity Space, and they came from Imperium Space. Those renters were the ones that were botting. And that created a huge controversy, because people were saying, told you so, or whatever. And then that led into more stuff. We won't go into that rabbit hole, but basically it became an arguing point for players. But the thing is, like, yeah, there are ratters that are renting from the Imperium, and if the Imperium knows who they are, then I guess it's not up to the players to enforce don't rat. But I don't think that's an excuse they want to use, because that doesn't wear well with the other players. But yeah, so that...
I mean, essentially a bot is a parasite on all the players. They should be completely unwelcome by all of us. They reduce the incentives from our activities. I don't know why anyone would think that botting is acceptable.
Yeah, I don't think they do. There's just a level of... Well, there was a whole controversy too, where they said, like, don't shoot people you suspect of being botters, because they might not be. Just report them to CCP. But if there's this acknowledged giant lag time, you're basically saying, we'll deal with it the only way we know how, which is to report them to the authorities and let the authorities handle it, even though that takes weeks. And we know who they are because we just followed them to highsec. So there's a few things going on there that are... they're not contradictory, but they kind of paint a picture of, like, we kind of care, we kind of don't care, we kind of care. But of course they claim to, like, totally care. And this is not just in Delve. I mean, it's worse probably in Fraternity. It's probably just as bad or worse in NCPL's territory. This is not exclusive to them, but that's just a clear example of it because there was a big fuss about it before. And by the way, I heard seagulls. Do you live near the ocean?
Yes, actually.
You're from a seaside town? That's awesome.
Yeah, it's an island.
You're an island? Oh, that's even more interesting.
Yeah, an island, Matterall.
Oh, you mean like UK island or a smaller island?
Smaller island.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, what were we just talking about?
We're
There
talking
was
about
something.
seagulls, Matterall.
No, it was before seagulls. So something about Iceland, I think it was. Never mind. There was a joke in there somewhere, and it had to do with like Hilmar in Australia and how dangerous everything was. Anyway, forget it. Back to what we were talking about. So there's this idea that they all went to, all the bots, all the 4,300 bots went to HiSec. Well, of course, they all didn't go, for sure. We don't even know how many went. And I don't think you can look at a couple of corporations in your territory that moved to HiSec to do some botting. No doubt some did, maybe only them, maybe a few more, who knows. But 4,300 is the largest banning of bots in the history of EVE Online. So it was a big deal. To wipe out all those bots, of course, going to hit the PCU, which everybody points to saying the game is dying and so blah, blah, blah. But you can't ignore that they took out more bots than they've ever taken out. If you see historically the unholy rage that happened in 2009 took a huge chunk of the economy with it, and that was less bots being banned at that time. So I think you should compare Unholy Rage with Blackout and the banning of the bots and compare those statistics to get a better analysis of how much those bots were sucking out of the economy. And remember, this is automated playing, which is essentially cheating.
Yeah, I think this might be a bit tinfoily, but from what they said about the rewards that they can now introduce into the game, my expectation is they've got something along the lines of the really good Triglavian content, or maybe Drifter content for nullsec, and they want to make sure, because it's rewarded, that it's also not botted. And so if you look at the most recent world news associated with Blackout ending tomorrow, it cautions that the restoration of full communications is contingent on strategic requirements as directed by Concord, and therefore the service levels are subject to change at short notice, according to circumstances. To me, that suggests that the new content is actually going to be associated with local turning off in the places where the new content comes.
Oh, interesting. To make that area specifically a little harder.
Yeah, and also harder to bot.
Yeah, that's a little tinfoily. And actually, and then they have suspected botters, they can drop it on it, right? Like they'll say, let's go there if they wanted to in a manual way, but eventually they want to get to an automated way with maybe some artificial intelligence built in. Of course, that's a big sci-fi dream, right? Artificial intelligence takes care of all the stuff that we can't think of, and it's omniscient and never tiring. And
I mean, a cheap and cheerful way to get the same effect is the new content might require you to go into a wormhole. Mm-hmm. There's already delayed local in there.
Yeah. So what he's saying here, this is CCP Cognac with Falcon on the stage. This is G Fleet conference that happened over the weekend. He was basically saying that the umbrella was a problem, and they stopped the umbrella and it worked. And now they're at the point where they can incentivize gameplay with lucrative prizes. And there was a big applause for that. That's the last thing that we've heard, and we're going to continue now with the announcement. At this point, they have not said that Blackout is going away.
About the blackout, how long it will last, what will happen next is kind of unclear. But there's a saying in Iceland, if you don't like the weather, You just wait 5 minutes. Or in case for you, Monday. That's when Blackout is out. No more Blackout from Monday.
So I'll stop there. And you see that they clearly both are uncomfortable because they start wobbling back and forth and looking at each other. So it's strange. One thing I want to note is the reaction. You would think if all the players were leaving the game because of Blackout would be a tremendous roar of glee. And that doesn't appear to be what happened. There was a few hoots and a few claps and a lot of murmuring. I figure people were confused and didn't really understand what happened. But he went ahead and re-emphasized it, saying Blackout is out Monday. It's gone Monday. And that's when there was no additional hurrahs or anything. So this is G Fleet. It's a meetup. It's just a sample group of players that are really dedicated to EVE Online, like all the people that go to meetups. And I don't think lifting Blackout was an overwhelming popular decision in that room. What do you think?
I think you might be right. It's partially down to the delivery as well, where people weren't really sure what was being said, and if it didn't work the second time, they might have tried the please clap now.
The applause sign, yeah. Yeah.
But Caleb's here. He might be able to speak more to what he sort of said in a very simple way, which is there was too much ISK. It was too safe, because this is sort of Caleb's special topic, I think.
Well, it depends on what you want to call too much, right? It's really more fundamental than just too much ISK. It's just, okay, a little bit of a rant. To me, it feels like CCP is just reading Reddit and they have no fucking clue what's going on. And the fact that they're saying that they're looking at metrics, it doesn't really feel like they're looking at metrics, or they're definitely not analyzing it right. It's a bit like when I teased All Mecha the other day, or teased his gameplay. Well, his ROI is not really that good, his return of investment, because he's running 40 or 80 accounts, right? So even though he needs to make enough money to feed all those accounts. So his ticks needs to be really high, and they're not, right? So when he gets a few billion worth of excavators with his muggery, he needs a lot of those to actually support his habit, right? And it's the same with the crabbing in Null. When you're considering how many accounts they're using to crab and how much support that brings to the destruction, right? They need to look at these things in perspective and per capita, and crunch the data in a meaningful way. How much of overall EVE destruction is done in Null versus other places, right? So I just think that they're not really grasping what they've done, and I don't think the umbrella is a problem. There's many fundamental problems, and of course, to some extent, you can say the response time of the umbrella is way too high, and they don't have to split it up. This is a problem. We've talked about the whole ambulance thing and the police that can teleport instantly. But it's not the fact that there is an umbrella. There should be. That's the whole point of building an empire or building out civilization and all.
See, I suspect what they look at is not the players that are logging in. That's not really what they're looking at. They're looking at the balance between the creation of ISK and the destruction of ISK, right? The figure you see on the MER. And then I think they're also looking at the player behavior of the players that did stay in the game and roll with the punches.
Yeah, and take the example of, when did any player ever ask for the panic module? Ever. Most players actually don't like it. They think it's dumb.
Well, okay, says you. I don't know how many players think it's dumb. I think there's a lot of people who like it. And it was not something that was expected, which CCP is trying to do. It's surprise players. But I want to back you up before we get into that. Back up to the umbrella is not the problem. Because a defense fleet is not a problem, right? You had in the Imperium, you had Theta Squad, which was a defense fleet, a standing defense fleet. In Horde, you have the same thing. In PL, you have it only during mining ops. So defense fleets as a concept are not a problem.
No, they're a really good feature. What you want is some sort of fundamentally useful incentive to fight. This is why I keep talking about burning farms and fields. This is why I keep talking about how do we figure out how to rebalance structures in general. So I want to go and fight my neighbor. If you want null fights, it should be null fights. It shouldn't be muggers going in and just, well, using the R word that you don't like me using. But that's basically what they're doing. This is why the whole, when it's dark, don't go out without a buddy.
What's the difference between an umbrella and a defense fleet, just as far as the vernacular that they're using?
It's the Sino, basically.
It's the umbrella. The umbrella is an arc, right? So you're moving from the center point to the outside of a certain circumference or radius. And that means you're flying in from many, many systems away using a Sino. And the only ships that can do that are capital ships. These are not battleship defense fleets. That's not part of the umbrella. That's a defense fleet.
It's more like a SWAT team, right? Or the equivalent of
it's more like tanks.
An ambulance. It's like an ambulance or a SWAT team that you send when someone is getting mugged, right? Literally. But you do something completely more of an escalation-like thing if you are actually being really attacked, right? This is not an attack, it's just a muggery. It's just null ganking.
Well, no, I think if you're sending in an ambulance or a SWAT team, all that has to take roads. This is like airdropping tanks, basically. These things can't be destroyed quickly. They're incredibly tanked. And if you drop 50 tanks into a supermarket parking lot, that place is secure.
You're assuming, again, like I kind of did a little bit in the past, I assumed that there was hardly any losses on the umbrella side and on the defense side.
There were early on.
But there is.
No, there were early on.
There really is. If you have something that's meaningful when you're attacking someone, then you will also be able to take out some of the defense force, right? That's just a fact. It's just that this is about small roaming gangs and muggers that want the entitlement of killing big fucking soft targets.
Early on, there were casualties because they got baited and they weren't big enough, but they just grew big enough. And at a certain point, they grew so big that everything became more secure, which in turn allowed them to grow even bigger. So that singularity has been hit, and now it's just accelerating. So, and that looks like in the Battle of X-47, you have 450 Titans coming up from the south, right? So an armada that's 450 Titans big, maybe a few more of Shield Titans that are staying at home. And then a few months later, 6-7 months later, you have double that number. That is exponential growth practically.
Okay, if I have 500 people living around a structure in one system, right? Would you want to limit how fast I can warp to a belt? Because I am now making a police force of battleships. Do you want to then nerf my ability to warp to belts and defend my miners?
Mm-hmm.
Well, scale it up, right? When you have 25,000 people in many systems, in many belts, should you not be able to defend them equally, right? On scale. This is really about scale. And the only people that hate this fact is the gankers. Is that they want these soft targets that they can endlessly just harass.
No, I was in favor of Blackout because I realized the problem. The problem is out of control money and scale and platforming and skill injectors fueling it all. I am not a ganker. I am not a ganker.
It's got nothing to do with the umbrella. It's got to do with the faucets. Fix the faucets.
Okay. You turn off the faucets for the big guys, you turn them off for the small guys. So I think this was a more elegant way, actually. And hold on a second. We're going to go back. I'm going to take some questions from chat here. And then we're going to finish the video. Let me just say welcome, guys. This is the 26th. Blackout ends today at downtime. So we were talking about it and reviewing it a little bit. We were looking at the video of the announcement. We'll go back to that just to finish it off, and then we'll come back, Caleb and Lux. 1 second.
Should be fun.
Yeah, it should be fun. Let's see what happens next.
I want to point out.
So
Okay, so there wasn't much else to say, but I want to point out the shock in chat. And there's boos and no's and woos. There's rip. Somebody says finally. Other people are confused. Another person says gross. Another person says wow. That's just surprise. Another person says, yeah, it's like a lot of confusion because the delivery was a little bit stumbly, but I think it was very much a surprise that they were going to lift it. The CSM knew 2 days before, but most players didn't know. But as we go on this video, I'll just mute it up and just let it crawl. I want to read out some of the messages that are going through here. There's there's worst decision ever. There's ROFL. There's what? It's hold on. It's going sick. Okay, it's going too fast because and this is during G Fleet on Friday or Saturday.
It's blinking, and it's so tragic. They should not have blinked. They should have introduced something to counter it. But everything looks as if it's...
1 second, let me turn you down. So you're saying CCP blinked?
Yeah, and they won't tell us that it's the chat system in general that's broken because they outsourced it.
All right, well, that's speculation, though. Do you have any...
Well, what happened today is pretty much pointing towards that, right? They try to fix this. They want to turn the blackout off, right? Then they turn the servers off. The servers and the chats are completely broken to a point that's horrible. They then shut it off and turn it back on. And then suddenly they say that there's an actual DDoS happening. And then they turn it on again after 15 minutes. And now it's fixed. Most DDoSes do not only last 15 minutes, and no one I know can solve a DDoS in 15 minutes.
All right, I'm going to take you back. We'll leave that right there. But I'm going to take you back to the comment you said that only gankers liked Blackout, and I said that's not true. And here's somebody, Alexander Page, in chat that says, I liked Blackout for ninja mining in his venture. Says no local was a buff to solo players, to be honest. And that says Everlasting Ellen. Yeah, so I'm going.
No one has said that there's no benefits with a Blackout.
You just did.
No. Most upper echelons have said Blackout is a fundamentally good solution to perfect knowledge. It's just you need to put something in there to counter it so you can still have knowledge. Now it's just black. It's like this is like turning off the lights and not allowing street lights. Like that's not how it should work.
That's like walking into a forest where shit is dangerous. And it should be.
I've built buildings and tried to actually make a town and a city with a capital and structures everywhere more productive than most high-tech.
Well, you can't do logging inside your cabin. You got to go out into the dark wilderness to do money making.
1DQ is not a cabin. Don't use that comparison. 1DQ is bigger than any station in anywhere in space except for JITA.
I'm using your analogy that you build safety. I get that. But beyond the confines of your little range, right? Your little fenced area, beyond the confines is dangerous territory where
and that's what they want. That's pretty much what most of null say they actually want. They want to be able to turn on the lights in selected areas so they can control and have intel in those areas. But everywhere that's not built out yet should be dark. They like that idea. Everyone I talk to like that idea. Rendis just wrote it in his article. There's fundamentally good ideas around Blackout. And this was what was discussed 4 years ago when we talked about structures.
Now you're taking credit for Blackout. You're saying it's great that it's gone, but you're taking credit for it being a good idea.
Yeah, because I was there. We all agreed. Do it, but give us the fucking streetlights.
But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is you've locked in a system of generating a ton of ISK. That is the problem I have with it. It's not that I want to go hunting. That's not my play style. I'm speaking from an analytical point of view of looking at the game. The game is in terrible health because it is sewn up and won by a certain perfect storm of injectors and large ships that are T1. They're not even T2 based, so there's no bottleneck. You just need minerals. And guess what? Now you have ships that mine the heck out of minerals, and you have massive surpluses. And those same minerals build a defense fleet that can jump to where they are. And if you get enough of those, it's really not dangerous. Without danger, you have an out-of-control economy.
I've told you a billion times now. The only solution to this is to create a responsive system that nerfs anomalies if they are being overfarmed. And ideally, the ADM should make anomalies completely worthless, and all that value should shift onto moon fracking. So you actually have a farm once you've removed the forest. You're not a hunter-gatherer anymore. Now you're a farmer. This is the design they should have put in from the beginning. And the fact that they introduced anomalies in the first place and made it possible to infinitely respawn these things is just dumb. It's the faucets. It's not anything else in the game.
Again, you turn off those faucets, smaller groups don't have that incentive to go into nullsec to try to make their own situation there. But that's just one thing. I'm not really, this is not my gameplay. I just know from a macro point of view that what was going on is bad for the economy. And yeah, everybody now will hem and haw and say, yeah, it's bad for it. You know, we told them, we warned them, we still did it. We still benefited from it. We're not giving any of that money back, even though it was bad for the game. But
the problem is very
now
few
we're
people
ready to
say what I
bad.
say. You can't fix it by changing the size of the cup. If there's a fountain running, people will just bring more cups. More people with smaller cups. It won't change anything. It's not nerfing the Rorqual. It's not removing the Rorqual. You have to hit the actual faucet. Otherwise, people will just scale with multi-boxing and just add more hulks. It's the same problem.
I disagree. But let me move on to some comments here so it's not just you and me.
Open up for Ace and Seamaster.
No, I'm not going to open up for anybody except you and Lux today. Okay, so I want a confined, intelligent discussion, and so it's going to be just a few people who disagree with me and people who agree with me. We'll have a bit of both. Actually, it's just you and me now.
Yeah, I know. I just it's a little bit frustrating because many of us still love this game. And
many
we're
of us.
trying to get CCP to, well, the most of us hopefully still love this game. We are trying to get CCP to go back and listen to some of the arguments that we have had for years. And one of them is you do not solve these things by just using a Nerf bat, because the Nerf bat does not necessarily hit the ecology or the economy. It's more complicated than that. And especially when it comes to infinities, we do not want infinities in the game.
Well, listen, I think what CCP was trying to do was trying to fix the game that was making everything meaningless, which was too much wealth in too many hands. You have a few really rich tycoons, you can aspire to that. But when everybody's a tycoon, it makes everything else worthless. I've seen it in other games like SWG. There was no economy for inferior products because everybody always wanted to buy just the best products. But there was so many of the best products that nothing below it got sold. The economy was flat. In this game, you have the same thing. Everybody's a gazillionaire.
Well, that's not entirely true. And it's not that easy to build Titans. And there's not that many Titans.
It's not true, but it's not true that everybody is. You're right. But you have built strong apparatuses, especially in Delft, because that was the first and best example of it. But also you have that in Horde, and you have that in NCPL, or you will at some point have that in NCPL. And you had it with Legacy Coalition. You had like 4 or 5 power centers that essentially have enough power to generate more power. SWG is Star Wars Galaxy. It was a different MMORPG that actually folded in 2000 and I want to say 8 or 9.
Yeah, because they made it easy mode and because they removed the original design, right?
Yeah. And here's something that's been floating, and I don't necessarily disagree with this. I just need more evidence, but I do feel like something was going on. And that was, this is Milken Pedro says, Nullsec first made an agreement to boycott the Blackout and ordered their guys not to log in for caps or ratting for a week plus. Nullsec deludes any evaluation of Blackout. And I do feel there was some of that. And it's disingenuous to think that there wasn't some of that, because they essentially, for the first time I've ever seen, and I watch this game all the time, what was essentially 4 major alliances that have umbrellas, that have, let's say, thousands of members, said you cannot use these ships. And that is the super caps, basically. You can't log in the super caps to RAT. If you do, you'll be killed. And they executed a Oracle pilot, not a super cap pilot, but essentially there was an example made of somebody that was disobeying these rules. So don't go out there for 1 week. I've never seen all the alliance leaders of these umbrellas agree on the same language and put it out there. There was clearly collusion. And now, did they know Blackout was going to end at that exact same period? I doubt it. CSM didn't know until 2 days before. I don't know if CCP had made a decision when nullsec had put this out. But I do think this. I think that there was an effort to shove the PCU numbers down CCP's throat. I think that regardless of what Imperium says, because again, they're the leaders in this null first thing. They're the biggest alliance, and the model that they used and pioneered is the one that's working best. They said, publicly, I think they were saying, well, we're just going to wait and see. We're going to wait and see. We hate these 4 or 5 or 6 different things that CCP has done, but these, but this Blackout will kind of wait for it. And so that was them being like restrained, not telling their members to log off. But then as soon as they got some statistics, they said, look, now we have the statistics. Now we're going to put this and stick this down their throat. These PCU numbers are dropping. We're going to stick that down their throat. And then they invite the guy, Tuzzy, to say, well, tell us how you made these numbers. And he says, well, I had a hunch and I found the numbers to prove it. And that's kind of what's fueled it. So there's no way to say that they were cool-headed and just looking at the numbers to see what they would do. I think there was always an agenda. This hurts their membership. It hurts nullsec membership to the tune of 15-20% over time, losing players to either HiSec or other game styles. You heard that some players were going into wormholes. They were basically starting to go into different parts of the game, which is not good for them. Some of them were leaving the game, which is very true because we've heard that from other people as well. But the point is,
you're spinning a little bit hard right now because null first has been a thing for almost a year and a half, right?
It's been a thing since 2005. It's been a thing since 2005, no. But
I'm talking about the recent collusion, the recent collaboration, especially regarding things like HiSec. That's been a thing now for almost a year, right? It's been rolled out and it's been agreed upon. So they already had their backroom going on, right? They all lost players during the blackout, right? Yeah. They've all lost those players before they even made this decision. And the decision had more to do with Sinos and mostly, I'd say almost all of it was due to the Sino changes. It had nothing to do with anything else. So they were not pressuring for blackout in any way.
I think they were going to shove the numbers of the PCU down CCP's throat. Now, was that for the betterment of the game? I suppose you could make a case that that's what they were trying to do.
But there was nothing left to give up, right? They didn't have any more to shove down their throat. There was no more losses, really. They're not expecting to push that even further down. On the contrary, all of the null groups I've heard say they really want them to come back. They want the numbers to go back up. This is horrible. We've lost all our fucking friends.
They were not saying that we lost all our fucking friends. And they were, of course, these numbers are horrible because this is a lot of their players that are leaving, which is what I'm saying. They're motivated.
It's entire corporations.
They're motivated to find out why this is. They're motivated to influence CCP that this is not good changes. You came out and you totally evangelized that with everybody else that came out. Maybe you did it for different reasons, but there was a definite effort to get CCP to change their mind. And that was perpetuated by the people who were most hurt by this, which is natural. And that was nullsec.
Not true.
Yes, to the point that they were colluding.
We did not say any of these things. We actually expected CCP to iterate on blackout. Most null entities expected some sort of announcement, but nothing came.
They certainly didn't sit by. They certainly didn't sit by and say, let's just wait, guys. Let's see what happens because CCP is going to iterate on this. I never heard that.
Most of the null entities I talked to said exactly that. They were hemorrhaging and they were getting pissed, true, but they were expecting some sort of announcement. And again, you're pretty much calling people like Commander A's, like Eric's, all of these people that's told you entire corps have folded.
true.
abandon the game.
That's true.
Horrible. That's your friends. That's your gameplay. Commander Ace had to go somewhere else, and
also
eventually he just said,
problem.
"I'm going to."
That's also the problem in EVE Online. If those guys went, I hate to say it this way, but maybe they were the problem. Expecting to have a Titan or a Super Cap ratting is something that was completely unheard of 2 years ago. And before that, it was a ridiculous concept. And now it's the norm. That is entitlement.
But the point is that, okay, many of these players were not necessarily against the Blackout in principle. It's just that this was a shock to the system. And I've said this many times, and you can pretty much see that that's what happened, right? People were not ready to adapt to this much change this fast. And yes, you're kind of right. Some of these people should have been more willing to adapt. But again, we were not really warned about this. We just got it slammed in our face. We got no narrative of what is the intention of this. And now we're being told it was just a test.
This is the fallback position. First you say it's a terrible thing, and then when you can't quite disagree with it, you start saying, well, it was messaged wrong, or it was put out wrong. Like I've heard that before too. It's the fallback position. Well, it's not that CCP made a bad decision, because we kind of like Blackout, but they just did it wrong. I don't agree with that. I think whatever you can do to dismantle CCP's ability to nerf what's going on is what you're going to struggle for. And that is where I feel like there's been a ton of conversation, again, in and out of talking stations, which is what I'm familiar with. I don't know what happened out there. I know the NC dot that I'm also familiar with, it wasn't that big a deal to them. The Sino changes are a much bigger deal. That's a bigger deal. So those are still in place, and we'll see how that goes. How's it going, Ashterothi?
Nullsec corporations are too big to fail. Bail them out.
Wow, that's actually a good burn.
That's funny, because I had started with this article that I can't seem to write. I don't know why I can't write it. I think there's just so much to say that I can't put it all in one article, or even several articles. Like maybe I could do 5 or 6. But what I started with was, this feels like 2008 when I started playing EVE Online. The economy was crashing. And I think what you just said, Ashterothi, now that it's all over, kind of reflects that. They're too big to fail, bail them out.
Wasn't that what they did in 2008?
Yeah.
As far as the messaging goes, there was a narrative. They did explain that it wasn't that it was probably temporary, but not short, and that they're doing a series of experiments to gather information. I remember those 3 things being said.
Yeah, and those things have said over and over. I mean, they said it in at least 3 different occasions. And
they also had a whole lore thing about it, too. So I'm not sure what you mean by that with the messaging thing.
Well, look, we're getting all hot and bothered about this, but let's be realistic. If we look at it from a company's perspective, which is really what they're looking at, right? CCP, and we can't speak for CCP. We're just estimating what their view is. That they needed to put a stop to something, and they were going to try a few things. And they maybe had Blackout, see what that looked like, because they had some evidence in January when chat broke that, it had some effects. And I think this has always been talked about for a long time, because it's a hunter's paradise, right? Or at least theoretically it is, but really it's just hunters bumping into hunters out there, and then everybody else staying home, which makes the FCs not happy because they want bigger, juicier targets in order to trigger bigger fights. Instead of this roaming culture. So whatever, everybody has a different point of view on this. But they're basically saying, let's do this Blackout thing, and maybe we'll do it for a month or 2 or whatever. Or maybe we'll do it to the end of the year, or maybe we'll just keep it if it's really popular, which it wasn't really overwhelmingly popular either. We got to make that very clear. So you have that happen until, this is your point, Ashterothi, Sino changes are ready to go. I don't necessarily agree with that point, but you were the one that kind of said that could be a possibility.
Right. And to be clear, I don't think that they're like, we need to delay things until we can have these Sino changes ready. Therefore, we're going to do this. Mm-hmm. I think it was more like, as time was going on, those 2 things corresponded, because the problem is that they are suppressing it more and more and more. But the problem, So they do Blackout, and they see this giant suppression, and they see all these really great healthy results of that, but yet they also see these really unhealthy results from it too. So what do? Well, can we create an environment that discourages ratting enough or makes ratting unsafe enough to bring things to the level that we want without this kills the nullsec? You know what I mean? Like, where is that happy medium? And maybe the happy medium is VNI nerfs, Sino changes, and no Blackout. We'll see.
Yeah.
And but it is worth noting that in the world news about the Blackout, they explicitly say that this could change again with very little notice.
But I get the feeling the CCP basically, the way they announced it, it was subdued. I think now they put out, you can see it now, they put out a blog post. I feel like it's they're not, either they didn't feel the urgency or they're not in touch with how emotional the issue was. Although they did say it generated a lot of talk, but they looked to me like they said, okay, let's pull this because we're going to have the Sino changes and let's see how those work. Like it's an experiment to see what this does instead. And I think if you had done the reverse, if you had just put out Sino changes because of the umbrellas, PvPers would have been furious that you're using PvE to mess up their gameplay. You remember when they nerfed the fighters? That's exactly what they said. So maybe this was covered.
Maybe.
Yeah, they nerfed the fighters, right? They nerfed the fighters. This is what got Quant in huge trouble. Remember when Quant got into huge trouble? What was that about?
200 million ticks.
Exactly. Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't exaggerate the number, but he gave like the best circumstance that's even possible theoretically, which could never be achieved, which was a wrong thing to do. But he put out a statement.
The issue wasn't the amount of money. It was his suggestion of how many people were making that much money.
Is that true?
Well, he made it as like the general was doing that, not this, because he later then came and proved that it was capable, but it was like the top 1% is doing this, not everybody. I don't know. Never mind.
Well, now everybody's doing it, right? Since he said
now
that,
everybody's doing it.
Yeah, you could look at what Quant said and got what do you call it? Tarred and feathered or whatever. What he said,
ran out of town.
Yeah, became true. Yeah, he literally left the company, but we don't know if that's why.
I know.
Not at all. It was
okay.
It's funny. I'm sorry.
That was a joke.
It was kind of a character assassination because he kind of overstated, and it was not because he was wrong. It was just he completely overstated it, right?
Well, he completely overstated how many people were doing it, but not the numbers, although they were perfection, right? The point is this: that was about fighter. They needed to nerf fighters, and he was trying to tell them, this is why we did it. People are making too much money, and the PvPers were saying, you're wrecking my gameplay for PvE adjustments, and that's just garbage.
But again, it's similar to if you have to do garden work and you have to dig a new lake for your fish, and someone says that your shovel is overpowered and they then just give you small spoons, you're just going to hire more fucking workers. It's not a problem. It will still be the same thing. And it's the same with these faucets. You need responsive faucets. It is the only thing that can really resolve all these issues. And that knob they can turn without any of us noticing, and we won't notice until it's too late.
I think it's coming, Caleb. If you look at the world news, it's sort of hinting that the PvE is coming to NoSec. Probably drifter PvE.
We'll see. That's all. We don't know if that's going to happen or not. But the point that I want to make is that when they did the fighter nerfs, there was some outcry. If you did the same thing with saying we got to break up these umbrellas, therefore we have Sino changes, you would have had PvPers and fleet commanders saying you can't balance the game around PvE. So maybe the idea is to put Blackout out there to make it really harsh, and then to lift that as some relief, while at the same time putting in something that appears to be less destructive to the gameplay of people. And they're like, whew, at least it's not Blackout. These Sino changes are bad for us, but at least it's not Blackout. Again,
why not try something like randomized Blackout, right? So it flickers.
Ooh. So again, the report today leaves things like that very much open for possibility.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what won't come back. It looks like by the language of Falcon, Blackout's not coming back. And here's why. He says this will just be a part of history like everything else. And that tells me they're putting that away.
Well, when I look at it, I see that they say, it's just the weather, and if you don't like it, you wait, which is the same way you could describe the invasions, right? Because they change where they are every day.
And it would be more cool if when the Drifter shows up, like they did in that Drifter event, which was overscaled, but if local went out when they show up, that'd be kind of cool. I don't think anyone would have an issue with that and would have slightly similar effects.
Yeah. Right. They're also working on soft changes within HiSec. So like you have the actual invasion proper, which is very impactful, changes how all the ships work inside of them and are extraordinarily dangerous. But then radiating out from those invasions, you have both the minor conduits and the Rasnaborg, which offer different kinds of challenges and opportunities. So it seems like there is these focused places and then other minor effects that can occur outside of those major effects. So if you translate this over to nullsec, you could see that weather pattern thing that you're talking about, where there's like a central point that's radiating out an effect, be it blackout or additional wormholes or whatever it ends up being. And then there are minor versions of it. So basically you've got normal, nothing's changed, dangerous, shit's going down outside, and actually opportunistic. Things are actually like there are more opportunities now than normal. Because
imagine if the lights went out before the Drifter attack. So it's like the hint that it's coming. It's like, oh my god, this would be cool. Wait a minute, fuck, local disappeared. Drifters are on the way. We have to do something. That would be so cool. And if it's semi-random, moves around based on what's the next weakest target in range, shit like that, make it interesting. And I'm telling you, Null would love that.
Okay, so it wasn't interesting the way they did it. Everybody said it's just a little bit of codes, the switch goes on, switch goes off, and Hilmar himself said technically, well actually he wasn't saying technically it wasn't easy to do, but as far as preparing was preparing the, I don't know if it was preparing the marketing for Blackout, but it wasn't necessarily difficult to do.
I'll be right back.
And I don't know if he meant technically, but what it did do is create interesting situations that for observers of the game it was a good deal. Go ahead, Ash.
The story it was telling was when the Drifters come to nullsec, a local goes out. What if that is the shape of things to come? What if that is part of the shape of the new PvE? I'll have to ask Ash, but I'm not quite sure what else quantum entangled helium-4 is used for. Is there some other feature in the game that's explained using this material? Maybe isn't it used to explain how we clone jump as well?
Sorry, who are you asking?
I was asking Ash. I think he's actually gone.
He's away. Yeah. We'll ask him when he comes back.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know that if there's any other features that fall into that umbrella.
Yeah. What gets me, I think, if I have to pull back, and this whole show has been about the same thing, which is totally fine. I think this merits it. Maybe 3 or 4 shows like this are merited with people from different perspectives on it. But I definitely want to get across from an analytical point of view, and I'm not unbiased. I never have claimed to be unbiased, but I am trying to be fair and allow different voices on one at a time so that it's a conversation. And when I look at this whole thing in the last few weeks, the basically bringing back, taking out Blackout, for as unpopular as you thought it was, didn't have a great reception at G Fleet, right? That's what we showed. And what you did have was a little bit of comedy with people clapping when they showed a picture of nullsec in trouble, which was in that form of a meme. So it kind of gives me impression of, yeah, there's a lot of people who kind of like this, or at least were relating to the situation in a comical way. But the second thing that really bothers me is the entitlement of players. And by the way, those players aren't coming back very soon, if they come back at all. Like those players, I think they feel like insulted and they took off. And I'm just like, I'm thinking, again, I'm thinking if you took off because you couldn't do your Rorqual mining as well, or you certainly couldn't rat in your super carrier, you were part of the problem. If you're coming back now that it's gone, I think you're coming back to be part of the problem. The problem was not everyone is supposed to be that rich because it completely blows out everything below that.
I wouldn't be surprised at all if this new content either isn't accessible by supers, or it can actually kill a super effectively if you go in without support.
The point is, easy money can't be a thing.
And that's kind of what Boat was trying to hint at. It sounded a little bit like he just wanted a new free ISK printing machine, but that was not really what he was saying. He was saying that there needed to be something more dangerous, something that, say, Titans and Supers could participate in more readily and actively and get bigger rewards, but at a risk of actually dying. So something like Lux was giving me the numbers for when the NPCs actually escalate to crazy levels, how many ships you have to bring, right? And then you really have to fucking run, otherwise you're just going to die. If a Titan or a Super could engage and participate in content like that, so it would also be at risk when escalations like that happened with NPCs, and there was a reward. That would be kind of cool. And then you would have a Super and Titan out there in the wild doing something that's not necessarily easy, so you could actually go in there and whale it.
I like what Arian says here. Blackout was exposing some hidden toxicity in existing players, and I think that's true. He goes on to say, "This whole players who don't subscribe to my way of the game are a problem. That is very toxic." I totally agree with that, and I'm frankly surprised and a little insulted about that sort of thing. And you know what's going to happen? I can feel it already. People are going to say, because the guys that quit, if they don't come back, the case made that you need to reverse this or people are going to leave is a little bit odd, right? Because they left, they're not coming back anyway. So why would you reverse it? At least these other guys who aren't taking off yet like it. Then I think what you're going to see is you're going to see people say, you see, you broke it. We tried to warn you, but you broke it and it's unrepairable. Those guys are now gone. It's your fault, CCP.
And just in my defense, because you keep saying or hinting at the fact that I'm biased, but I have not really changed my opinion. No, I have not really changed my opinion or what I say since fucking Summer of Rage. And even before that, I'm fundamentally for the same things. I'm arguing the same design flaws, right? So I am not null-centric. I am not fucking goonsplaining when I'm coming up with these things that are solutions. I'm just being macroeconomic.
That's why you're here. Otherwise,
thank you. And you also told me the other day that I actually do some thinking on occasion, I think.
This is why
I occasionally think.
This is why you're here and why I don't want to hear from you. Have sophisticated arguments and you've had consistency. And right now you're lining up with the people that I am talking about as more or less toxic. But when I yell at you, I'm not yelling. I'm trying to yell through you to but yeah, that's why you're here.
And I am just telling you that many, many, many null people, especially the ones that's been here for a long time, fundamentally agree, but they don't necessarily want you to just yank the carpet and remove their gameplay instantly, because that's going to shock them. They can't adapt, and they're going to have morale issues. And, well, you basically saw this for the last 2 months, right?
And listen, I want to say, just like you, Caleb, I think that I also walk a fair line. And I've been on both sides of issues. When World War B was going down and Goon Swarm was in the worst place ever, I think they would tell you that I was right there with them. I was right there saying, look, you guys in PL, you guys are more toxic than Goons are. Like, you guys can't say they're toxic, therefore we're killing them. You guys were more toxic at the time. So I too am essentially defending the little guy, whoever that happens to be at the time. But that's the consistency, is to defend the smaller guy. And what I see now, essentially, is the rich abusing the poor, essentially.
Maybe a little bit, but it's more fundamental than that, and we do need some sort of faucets that have a catch-up mechanic. It's just if they're not responsive, they won't have that function. because then the old players can just scale and do easy. Which is why I keep saying that if I was CCP, if I was Hilmer, I would do something that might actually enrage the player base even more, but it would actually solve many problems. I'd remove ISK printing entirely from null, and I would remove blue loot from wormholes and put all ISK printing in high sec, but they then have to import all their things, so the money would flow back to wormholes and back to null. It would just be reflected in the price of the thing that you can't get in high sec.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that CCP has said is they want to unwind a lot of the controlling features that players have to amass big groups. I don't know if they said big groups, but too much control, too much safety is a big mantra that they're trying to unwind that. And I think part of that is the ESI. I think they need to dial that back quite a bit.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you're going to remove blue loot, what would actually replace that economic value?
It would be reflected on the unique items and the unique scale that resources are available in only wormholes and only in null, right? Of course,
Right.
I wouldn't remove it entirely. I'm just saying that the responsiveness of a dynamic AI should hammer down the payout of ISK in null and in wormholes very fast to get reflected on things like Morphite, on things like T3 components. So that is your unique fucking thing. That's what you can only create in that location. That should be what's priced high.
Right.
Also, if you take the bounties out of nullsec, it will actually be a conflict driver, because if you've got a guy over there who's putting the same stuff on the market that you're putting on, you've got a real incentive to go and crush those guys so you can monopolize it more.
So, but the problem is that you're not also increasing the demand on T3 production and supplies. Therefore, either wormholes drop significantly in value because you've basically eliminated their primary income, or their primary activity becomes about farming pieces for T3 cruisers, which will either not make them enough or crash or crush the value of those T3 cruisers.
Yeah, it's all tied together, but it needs to be something that's a seesaw, a negative feedback system. So if you're doing one, the other responds in the opposite direction, right? So I would never just do it as a blanket thing and just yank something. I would make the AI just do exactly the same thing as it did with office rental fees, right? Turn it a little bit every day if you have a system that's being overused, right? If you are printing too much ISK, it just turns down the yield for the next day. This is why I'm saying that I think the technical solution is to do a buff and debuff system that pretty much gets calculated at downtime. So it says, okay, you have 400 guys in this region all printing ISK. I'm just going to slam that.
I don't want to theory craft up here, because we can go on forever with that, and that's what you can do after the show. But I want to analyze the news of the day. So wrap it up, Ashterothi, and then we'll go on.
Well, I just, I mean, I was okay with that argument, but it's a different argument than the one you originally said, because you said remove all blue loot and remove all bounties.
I do have a quick question for Ash that I didn't get to ask before, which is just putting your lore hat on. What are the other game functions that the quantum entangled helium-4 has? Because it's getting name dropped in the world news.
It's literally Plex. So
Plex.
Plex is quantum. If you look at the description of Plex, it's basically solidified quantum entangled helium-4. So that's why you have to pay for Plex, because that's basically you paying for your use of the fluid router network for your cloning technology. Because as it turns out, clones take a lot of data to pass through. And so, but in the news, it's interesting because the way that they solve the problem is by discovering additional stockpiles and increasing production of helium-4, in particular in nullsec. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not they do make that into a point of interest, where like the helium-4 in an area can be suppressed, which may, if left out of control, lead to a blackout-like event or something.
So it's just basically local is the thing that it's connected to then in terms of gameplay?
It's the fluid router. It is the fluid in the name fluid router.
I mean,
So
what I'm getting at is, does this like run the gates? Does it run jump cloning? What else?
it runs all FTL communication.
Okay, cool.
All right. Well, we're wrapping up the show here. I want to give the quote of the day to Ashterothi, who dropped it right at the beginning of coming in here. What was it? Null's too big to fail. Bail him out.
Null alliances are too big to fail. We have to bail them out.
Oh my God, that's so appropriate. Oh, it certainly feels that way. I guess this was an emotional episode, and it's totally great to have these kinds of discussions. I should probably lower my voice. I apologize, Caleb, for raising it, and whoever else I offended. This is okay. I'm not afraid of arguing with. When there's enough trust in a relationship, it's okay to raise your voice. I think it's when you argue with someone you don't know very well that it gets awkward. And Caleb and I have known each other for years.
Too many years now.
Yeah.
Hollering in stations.
Yeah. We want to get back to talking in stations, not hollering in stations.
I can teach you how if you want.
Yeah, you're kind of a new star at TIS for me, Lux, because you have such an undercutting, quick, like analytical mind. You get right to the core of it, like these two can. Ashterothi does very well at that too, but your delivery is so deadpan. So it's good having you around. All right. You guys have anything else on this for today? We may come back to it tomorrow. It's full. But what we want to get across today was the announcement was over this weekend. G Fleet has said Blackout will end today. So at downtime today, the local will come back to nullsec. However, things will not resume the way they were before because you still have Sino changes that are going to impact the super capital umbrellas, and we'll see what adjustments they make for that. Now, I personally feel that they're going to find a way to work around that. I don't think it's going to be enough. And Caleb, you think faucets should be turned off, which I agree with.
Yeah, and I must say that we are kind of having the chaos era still, right? Because we don't have blackout, but we have random chat. That's very imperfect knowledge.
But the lifting of blackout is also chaos, right? Like it's a reversal. People who made plans.
I would be very I would caution anyone that equates the return of local with the end of the chaos era. I mean, we still have been getting changes every week. Until we have a period of time of stability, I will not change, or I will not stop calling it the chaos era.
I mean, we've still got our Triglavian dread shipyards hanging about in the abyssal filaments, so that's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And like for me, everybody's freaking out about blackout, and here I am reading the world news going, oh my God, they mentioned the Vamashka chorus.
Yeah, I saw that too.
And Lux and I are kind of working on 95 theses to hammer on CCP stores by 2020 April.
Yep, just some small stuff, some big stuff. No removing implants in space is fun.
New Eden Reformation League.
So the chaos era will continue, and you've heard that from Hilmar when he was at FanFest at home, that it's really no longer an issue of patch notes and looking at EVE Online as a toy with new prizes and new features. It's looking at EVE Online as an experiment that is ongoing. And he says one of the ways they got into trouble, like how did CCP let it get to this point? Well, a lot of people were saying it's getting bad, it's getting bad, it's getting bad. And he said the reason for that was they kept looking at the future, at new features, and they weren't paying attention to what's happening at the moment because it was such a slow creep. But I do know from talking to CCP Fozzie, CCP doesn't want to move on things very quickly. They want players to try to figure something out and figure out counters to other people's advantages, and they want to let that play out fully before they say, okay, that's stagnant. Let's fix it.
The point I think I would make to CCP is they should try to use what I call the titration method, right? Anyone that's done chemistry and knows how titration works, how you just drip, 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 and then you get the fucking effect you're looking for. That's the way of actually doing these iterations and balancing things. Whether you're talking about faucets or ship balances, try to do a drip feed thing instead. Very small incremental changes, day after day after day.
So there's an interesting problem with that, which is that humans are not do not operate by physics; they operate by psychology and sociology. So if you make those changes, there may be a reluctance to actually react to the changes if they are subtle enough. So if you buff one ship over another, but only a little bit, the shift from one to the other will be subdued until the change is dramatic enough to warrant that shift over.
But that's a
So
new data point. That's an important data point, right? You now know when psychology overtakes physics.
right, but
you
it's going to
guys
be
say that, but
that doesn't
looking at
tell
some
us.
of the players, they're completely defined by inertia.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the thing is that it doesn't matter. Even if you got that data for one specific point, that actually doesn't help you for any other point. Human behavior when it comes to these kinds of things are very finicky and hard to pin down.
Mhm.
And so the concern that you have, if you do not wait for the customer, or for the players to basically adapt to a challenge, then what might happen is as you reduce the challenge, they will also develop a strategy, and now you'll be way out of whack, like even further out of whack than you would have been before.
I would bet you money that there's a correlation that's actually a math point, that humans do behave exactly in some sort of mathematically predictable way when you're doing this drip feed thing. Because it's exactly like when market shifts, the average is almost always, a turning point is almost always around 17%. For some reason, no one's got a good explanation, but it's exactly like things like the wisdom of the crowd. There is math underneath it. We just don't know it, which is also why this would be very valuable data to get.
I think there's hold on. I think there's nature.
psychophysics.
I think there's. I think this example comes from the environmentalism of the raising of 2 degrees temperature has catastrophic effects on the world between 1 and 2%. I think we're already over 1%, so we're getting at 2%. But when do the catastrophic things happen? They don't ease in. What happens is if you have a plastic bottle and you're dripping water into it and you're pushing at the top, you'll push and push and push. And as the water gets higher and higher, there will be no difference to you. But at a certain point, and I don't know if this is a tipping point, when you push, there is enough water in it to make it tip over. There's no going back. The whole thing falls over. It doesn't lean to one side.
Right. And the issue is that, so if you made a 17% change, you'll probably get the predictable result. But if you make the 17% change 3% at a time over the course of 6 months, you will probably get a totally different result.
But I will bet you there's an underlying logic and math underneath it if you start actually picking the numbers apart and saying, okay, what type of change is it? What amount of people are playing it? What's the actual turning point? Where does it actually change?
So use Eve to figure it out and become a gazillionaire.
And do you know how you figure it out? By doing crazy things like Blackout and taking a whole bunch of data.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to run over to Ron, USMC. He's a skirmish commander for Test Alliance. Check him out. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Please give us some ratings, good or bad. You guys may not agree with us, but if you like the quality of the discussion and that sort of stuff, then give us some ratings, and always go to Patreon/Matterall to support us or support us here. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow.